Okay, it is a delight to be here amongst all of you at this special Meet the Author event. Now, I'm your host. My name is Lunglei. Okay, today's event is coordinated by the Department of English of Government J College. Now, we're in partnership with Zonet JB Cable Network. Now, Zonet JB Cable Network is a local cable network that is providing coverage of our event this afternoon as well. Now, we apologize for the seating arrangement we have today. We had the hall prepared for the university examinations that is to start next week. So we hope you understand. Okay, as your host for this literary rendezvous, I'm filled with anticipation for the enlightening conversations, the fascinating anecdotes, and the profound insights that await us. Today we have the distinct honor of meeting the incredible author of If I Have to Be a Soldier, Mr. Nikhil Alva. We're not just here to celebrate the book, but we're going to dive into the world that Mr. Alva has so vividly created for his readers. So without further ado, let's get on with our program. First off, I'd like to invite the head of the English Department and Associate Professor, Mrs. Latangmoy Changte, to deliver the welcome speech.
Tibai, and a very warm welcome to everyone present here. I extend a special welcome to Mrs. Priya Alva and Mr. Nikhil J Alva, who is the reason for our gathering here. Let us give them a big hand. A couple of days ago, I got a call from Mr. Joseph Lalhimpuya, informing me about Mr. Nikhil's intended visit to Lunglei. And he asked me whether we would be interested to have interaction with him on his debut novel, If I Have to Be a Soldier, a novel that is set in perhaps the darkest period of Mizoram's history, that is the Rambuai period. We jumped at the chance because in our little corner of the nation, such opportunities do not come our way every day. Moreover, we did not want to deprive our students of the opportunity of coming face to face with the award-winning producer, director, and writer, who also happens to be an environmental warrior. So we jumped at this once-in-a-lifetime chance, and we decided that we will hold this event. And it is indeed, as I said, a one-in-a-lifetime event because, you know, we have Mr. and Mrs. Alva here in our very own campus. So we collaborated with Zonet JB for wider coverage, and we sent out invites to different institutions and to persons who might be interested. And finally, here we are. We are now on the threshold of an exciting afternoon, and an afternoon which we will not forget anytime soon. So as we engage with our past in a novel way, through the talk from our author and through dialogue in the interactive session, I am confident that we will not just be entertained, but also educated. Abig takin students teka zona teka zo shela ula mo zona kan zot pop don neo kan rilrua ang angka. So I managed to get a copy of the novel from a friend, and I skimmed through it because I did not have much time. And though I'm no authority on the historical accuracy of the, accuracy of the historical aspects, I found the narrative gripping. The problem of identity the othering of people, the conflicts resulting from the characters' prejudices, juxtaposed against love and friendship between characters, which blurs the binaries of them and us. And this lends a human touch to the novel. Now, the body of works, fiction and non-fiction, pertaining to the Ramboi period has grown in the last couple of decades. And this book, which incorporates an outsider's unbiased observation of the Ramboi period, is a very welcome addition. Being born in the aftermath of the Ramboi, I guess I'm roughly the same age as Nikhil. So there were many scenes in the story that brought back memories of my own experiences as a child. The convoys, the curfews, the soldiers searching our vehicles in the numerous checkpoints between Lunglei and Aizawl, and us getting down every 20 to 30 kilometers while soldiers searched our buses. That was a real trial, especially when we were motion sick and retching every now and then. And then there were the stories of atrocities we heard from our elders, and the general feeling of fear hanging over us. Yes, the book engaged me in a new way on a past that I had locked away and had almost forgotten. It also brought back my own memories of the smell of the cherry blossom shoe polish. So the book's dedication reads, I quote, "For the great Mizo people, may your suffering, your sacrifices, and your stories never be forgotten." Yes, our stories need to be told, not only to the rest of the world, but to our own children and their children, so that they do not lose sight of the fact that they stand on the shoulders of great men and women whose suffering and whose sacrifices have given them a better life. So to Nikhil, I thank you for telling our story. And to all of us here, especially my young students, let us engage with and reacquaint ourselves with our history, with our culture, for the Mizo story is no less than the stories of other great cultures. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful speech. Now, throughout the program, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Nikhil Alva, and hopefully hear readings from his debut novel, If I Have to Be a Soldier, and also engage in discussions. And of course, we'll have a chance to meet Mr. Alva in person. And I'd just like to read out a review that was written by a member of parliament and also a noted writer. He is known for his command of the English language, Mr. Shashi Tharoor. So his review of the novel, Nikhil Alva's If I Have to Be a Soldier is a vital reminder of the challenges facing Indians living on the margins of the nation's consciousness. A searing exploration of fragmented identities, this enthralling novel brings to life a fraught period of India's history. The Mizo insurgency of the late 1960s. Deeply ambivalent about his Mizo identity, Sammy, the novel's troubled protagonist, is a man struggling to escape himself and the cataclysms that have mishaped him. As he endeavors to become a gallant officer of the Indian Army, he finds himself being mired in a past he had sworn to forget, and that perhaps is his biggest undoing. Keenly observed and pineally lined, If I Have to Be a Soldier marks an impressive debut. And that is what Mr. Shashi Tharoor wrote in his review. And I think it is really, really impressive. And so throughout history, authors, they have served as guides, they've served as mentors and companions on our individual journeys of self-discovery and enlightenment. Today we have the privilege of not only witnessing the magic of this craft, but also engaging with the brilliance behind his words firsthand, a man of many talents, an award-winning producer, director, and writer. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Nikhil Alva to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you for those warm words. Do appreciate it. And thank you, all of you, for coming to this little event. Really excited to see all of you, and I hope I can share some elements of the book, maybe the story with you guys. You get a sense of what it's about, and hopefully some of you will actually read the entire novel at some point in time. But before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about myself, right, and the context to this novel. So I'm from the South. Bangalore is my hometown, but I went to school and college in Delhi, lived in Delhi pretty much most of my life. Have a lot of friends from all over the country, certainly from the Northeast, Mizoram, Nagaland, a lot of places that we went to school and to college together. I have one classmate, Timpui, who's here today with us, for which I'm very grateful. So I have traveled extensively around India. I have, over the years, made a lot of friends from many different cultures. And it's been fantastic. I think in Delhi that tends to happen. You tend to meet people from all different kinds of places and different regions and states. For me, I studied maths at St. Stephen's, very different from English. I did a lot of sports. I was the captain of my college cross-country and athletics team. I played in a rock band, keyboards, right? Traveled a lot. And after college, I didn't get into a job. I started a company on my own with my brother, with my best friend Priya, who's here today, who's now my wife. And we we set up this little company straight out of college, right, to produce television programs. Now you might have heard of the company Militech, and you might not have, but I'm sure some of you guys would have heard of some of the shows we created. One of them was Indian Idol. Anyone here heard of Indian Idol? No one's heard of Indian Idol? This girl has heard of Indian Idol, okay. So we produced Indian Idol, we brought it to India, created the first 5 seasons of it. MTV Roadies, anyone has heard of MTV Roadies? Okay, there are a few more people, right? So we created that show as well and went on to television, became a big hit. And we created a lot of television content for young people for across different platforms and networks over the years. Our work won many awards in India and abroad, including a Green Oscar for some of our environment programming way back in 1996. I don't know if any of you have been born then, but still, it was like a long time ago. So my background has been media. My background has been understanding society, making documentaries for global networks like Nat Geo and Discovery. And it has certainly been getting under the surface of a lot of events, especially in modern Indian history, and trying to understand what took place, how it took place, who the key characters were, more important, what was the motivation, right? And for me, that is the backdrop to my first novel that I've written. My relationship with the area, with the broad geographic area we call the Northeast, goes back actually to my mother's work. She was a politician. She traveled. She was in charge of the Northeast for the Congress Party at one point in time in the 70s when I was very young. And with her, she would take her children. She had 4 kids. I was the second. And by turn, we would be taken on these road trips all over the Northeast, accompanying her on her work, right? And that's how I got a first-hand introduction to the issues and to what was going on over here. In the 70s were troubled times. There was a lot of violence, not just in Mizoram, but in many other areas. And as a young boy, that was very scary for me. A lot of the things that I saw and experienced were troubling and scary, and it stayed with me. When I was much older, I heard about the motam, right? The flowering of the bamboo once every 48 years. And I found it incredibly fascinating that from that flowering of the bamboo comes the plague of rats, comes famine. And then because the famine and it's handled so badly by the government and so many people die, right? It actually gives rise to an insurgency that runs for 20 long years. Okay, and I found that story so powerful, so compelling as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, that I wanted to do something with that story. I'm not a Mizo. I don't pretend to know your culture better than you do, or your stories better than you do. But as an outsider, I was really moved by all that I'd read about that period of time, about the atrocities, about the violence, about the fact that Delhi turned a blind eye to what was going on and allowed this to continue for so long without sitting down to try and resolve some of these differences, disturbed me. So at first I wanted to do a documentary on this idea, but I felt that format would not do justice to the layers and the complexity of the characters and the storytelling. So finally I settled on a piece of fiction, a work of fiction. So these are fictional characters in this novel, but set against real historic events that took place, right? So the events are all real, they've been well researched and documented. The characters are fictional, okay? So I want to put that and make that very, very clear, but I chose that as my form of storytelling. So what I'm going to do now is, let me tell you the story, right? Because I know a lot of you won't read the novel, some of you I'm sure will, but it's probably great to just tell you the story, right? Or some parts of it, and read you some excerpts from the novel to give you a feel of the flavor, okay? So I'm going to start right at the beginning with the first chapter. It's like 2 pages long, 3 pages long. I'm just going to read it, okay? It'll give you a sense of the flavor and feel of what I'm trying to do with the characters. So the chapter is called Revelation. It starts with, at dawn, a shrill, anguished, full-throated wail pierced through the dense fog that hung over the village, rousing the villagers from their slumber. When minutes went by and it hadn't stopped, the villagers stepped out of their bamboo huts, begrudgingly, into the cold to see what the commotion was all about. Soon the entire village had gathered, huddled in small groups, peering into the fog, searching for the source of the disturbance, unsure of what to do next. Then someone shouted, "It's the witch wailing." The villagers let out a collective sigh of exasperation. They had grown tired of the witches, or as she was locally known, the Davi Tiyam Pitar. Pardon my pronunciation, it won't be perfect, unlike yours, but I'm going to try. Okay, frequent shenanigans, and many of them cynically dismissed her early morning wailing as another of her attention-seeking ploys. The cynics retreated into the warmth and comfort of their huts to try and eke out a few more minutes of sleep. The more adventurous clambered down the slippery, slush-covered path that led to the giant bamboo grove at the edge of the village. It was where the witch lived, alone, deep inside the grove, in a dilapidated shack she'd built for herself, with corrugated sheets of rusted metal and discarded wooden crates she'd scavenged from the village. When the villagers got to the periphery of the grove, the first rays of the early morning sun had broken through the giant bamboo stalks. The morning fog that had enveloped the village had begun to lift. It was only then that the villagers saw that the bamboo had flowered overnight. From each node, on every plant, grew long, spiky, pale yellow flowers, thin-stemmed and without petals. Backlit by the rays of the early morning sun, the flowering of the bamboo presented a stunning spectacle that enthralled the villagers. But the elders were filled with a sense of foreboding. They remembered the last bamboo flowering, 48 years ago, and the devastation it had wrought on the Mizo hills. The bamboo flowers had transformed into fruit. The fruit that had avocado-like seeds had drawn swarms of rats from the jungles. The rats had chomped and gorged on the fruit and the seeds day and night, making them stronger and much more fertile, multiplying their numbers exponentially. When the fruit and the seeds had been devoured, the rats had turned their attention to the crops in the fields and the food stocks that villagers had stored in their huts. Soon entire villages were overrun by the rodents, forcing the villagers to flee, abandoning their homes and their crops. In the ensuing famine, hundreds of Mizo men, women and children had starved to death. So the novel starts with that. It starts with this setup of, a foreboding, of a warning, right? It's April 14th, 1959 when this flowering happens as per the novel. So let's jump into the story and tell you, what the story is about and why it relates to you. So the story is, a lot of it is set in the fictional village of Asakwa. It's supposed to be 20 km south of where we are right now, right? So that's where it's set in Lunglei, about 20 km, the fictional village is 20 kilometers away. It was created by Reverend White, who wanted to create a model village and with members of different tribes, all bonded together by Christianity, and with this beautiful church right in the middle, of this village it basically attracted people from all over to come and take a look at it. So that's the village, that's where this novel is set. The novel is, my story I tell across 5 decades, starting from independence all the way up, to the peace accord in 1986. The story is a lot of different things. It's a thriller, it's a story of survival, it's a coming of age story, it's a story of identity, it's a story of discrimination, of betrayal, but above all, it is a story of love, right? It is essentially the story of 3 young people, 3 kids who grow up together in the village. There's Sammy, who's the adopted son of the pastor, in the village, and his wife. There is Sina, who's like the son of the village school teacher, and he's got 2 sisters, there's Christine and there's Martha. And the 3 of them grow up together. Each of them is very different. Sina is basically an outdoorsy, adventurous guy. He's a fantastic hunter, wrestler, football champ. He's the classic outdoor guy, right? Sammy is very studious, right? He wants to be like the other guys. He wants to, be outdoorsy, but he just can't, right? He doesn't have it. But he's very good. He's a very studious guy, and he does very well academically. And then there's Martha, who's a year older than Sammy, and they're friends, and she's a fantastic musician, and she's the love of his life, right? From childhood, she's just, he's completely smitten by her. She doesn't feel the same way about him for most of their growing up lives. She treats him like a brother, a really good friend. It's only much later that she reciprocates, his feelings for her. So one chunk of the book is about their growing up years, right? They're growing up years right here, like you guys, in this area, but in the 50s and 40s and 50s, right? So many, many years ago. It's about what they go through, it's about their experiences, coming of age, heartbreak, that space, school, things that happen to them. The turning point of the story really comes, it's April 14th, 1959. It's where a lot of events take place that, completely set the plot going. So it's the day, like I read earlier, where the bamboo flowers. And the bamboo flowering suddenly happens after 48 years. It also happens to be Sammy's 17th birthday, right? On that day, from a turn of events, something happens that triggers Sena's anger. He catches basically Martha and Sammy together in private, and he gets really angry with his friend, and he attacks him, and it's very violent. And then Sammy is falsely accused, of rape, right? And as a result of which, he has to flee. He has to run away from Asakua because he was set to join the army. His mother is the daughter of a brigadier, and she wants her sons to join the Indian army come what may, right? So although he's not an outdoorsy guy, and he's like, he's more gentle, more arty, because of his the push from the mother, he's applied to the NDA, he's gotten, and now with this incident, he runs away from Asakua, he disappears, right? And he vanishes from their lives, right? Leaving the love of his life behind. Now, the autumn has come, and the bamboo is flowered, and all the things the elders predict actually happen. The rats invade the villages, and the crops are destroyed. The famine comes, and finally, even Sena and his family are forced to flee Asakua, and they move to Aizawl. So I'll just read. I'll read that passage to you of them when they leave. It was raining heavily in Asakua the day Ioma, Christine, Sina, and Martha decide to give up their battle against the rats and move to Aizawl, where Ioma's brother lived. They packed a few suitcases with clothes and valuables, fastening them firmly onto the soft canvas roof of their jeep with bamboo ropes. All along the dirt track, they saw the old and the young, the weak and the hungry, trudging in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, carrying their meager belongings in jute sacks and bamboo baskets balanced on their heads. Many never made it. They fell by the wayside, too weak to carry on. A few miles from Sership, pardon my pronunciation, the rain had triggered a landslide, blocking the road to Aizawl. Desperate, Ioma and his family sought refuge in a relief camp that had sprung up in the playground of a government school. The camp hosted 100 or more temporary shelters, made of bamboo frames covered in black tarpaulin sheets that had been donated by the relief agencies but were being sold on the black market for 10 rupees a sheet. Everything in the camp, including the right to build a shelter and rations, came at a price. Ioma had the money to ensure that his family were well taken care of in the camp, but there were many who weren't as lucky. A tribesman with a large crucifix around his neck shivered in the damp and the cold in the shelter next door, too weak to sit up. His wife was cooking a thin potato soup on a small fire she'd got going in the middle of the shelter. Their 4 young children looked longingly at the soup, all of them looking terribly undernourished and sickly. The family had walked for 9 days from their village in the highlands, surviving their forced march by eating leaves, shoots and roots they'd found from the jungles along the way. One of the children whimpered, "I'm hungry, no." His sister put her arms protectively around him. "Be brave, we'll all eat soon, be brave." The tribesman wailed from the corner of the shelter, tears flowing down his face. My God, why have you forsaken us?" Racked with guilt for the relative comfort their money had brought them, Mata asked Ioma for 5 rupees to buy their neighbors food. "Who all will you feed, Mata?" Ioma asked grudgingly, handing her the money. "Look around you, everyone is in the same boat." "We aren't," Mata said firmly. So this happens and they move to Aizwal. Over there, Sena is attracted greatly by, what's going on over there. So Pul Aldenga has basically fired the imagination of the young people. He's talking a language of, of justice, of change. And Sena then joins the MNF. And when they decide to make their move and to actually start a guerrilla, war, he goes to the training camp where he's trained, and he is a fantastic guerrilla because he's already a great hunter and an outdoorsy guy and a sportsman, and he really, does very well in that environment, and he's a captain, and he gets promoted later to become a major, and he's a very, a very popular leader. In fact, he takes on the avatar of Che, Che, the Latin American guerrilla commander. So he bases himself on that look and feel, in the way he talks and dresses and behaves is based on Che, the Latin American guerrilla leader. So then comes Operation Jericho, of course, in '66, and there's this big action that takes place all across the Mizo Hills. At first, it's very successful, but then the army is brought in, and it becomes very violent very soon. It spirals out of control, and it's pretty ghastly things that are going on. At this time, Sammy has just finished his NDA. He's joined the army. He's a captain in the army, and he gets posted back because he speaks the local language, and they want an officer who speaks the local language, understands local customs. So he's sent back, to the Mizo Hills. And by chance, he's sent one day to interrogate someone, a guerrilla leader that has been, captured by the Assam Rifles. In the book, by the way, they're called the Frontier Force. And it turns out that is Sena, right? He's meeting his old friend, estranged friend, but now in completely different circumstances. They are both on different sides of this divide. The other layer that happens is that Sena, there's a commandant, an Assam Rifles commandant, who's very angry, a Frontier Force commandant, whose wife and child have been killed in an ambush, right? So he has a personal score to settle with Sena. So he's out to basically get this guy. And Sammy realizes that if he doesn't step in, they're going to kill him. They're going to stage an encounter and kill him. So when Sammy steps in to stop that encounter from happening, inadvertently one of the officers gets shot, and then Sena and Sammy become fugitives, and they are on the run. So a large chunk of the novel is that part of the story where the two of them are on the run. It's a race against time, it's survival, right? Trying to get to safety. So that's the middle chunk of the novel, and the final resolution, of course, happens. I won't tell you, what happens in the story, but the final resolution, it is 1986. The peace accord has been signed, right? And a lot of these story strands then start converging to arrive at some sort of conclusion. Will Sammy and Mata be reunited? You need to read the novel to find out. What happens to Sena and Sammy and their friendship? You need to read the novel to find out. But broadly, that's the story, that's the backdrop, okay? And I've chosen to use this particular technique of fiction against the backdrop of real historical events to tell this story. Okay, so that's the story, and that's my story. Do you want to open it up to questions, or how do you want to do? Okay, so yeah, I think it's best. Let's just open it up to questions. Anyone has any questions, observations, right? Happy to answer. And don't be shy, come on.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Thank you. Can you start by just giving your name?
I'm Samson from 6th semester English department from this college, College. And today my question is what incidents or who maybe can be who. So, what inspired you to write this novel? And the second one is which is the most challenging chapter in this novel? Yes.
So, what inspired me, I think, more than anything else, is, like I said earlier, is the connection between the mortem, the rat plague, the famine that leads to the insurgency. I found that linkage really fascinating, because very often we don't really get to the root cause of violence, right? We look at violence in abstract, or we go maybe one level down, they were unhappy, people were unhappy, and therefore, right? But if you actually go multiple levels, and violence doesn't just sprout from nowhere. It is years and years and years of anger, of frustration, of betrayal, of a lack of communication, right? That one day takes the root of violence. So as an author, I'm interested in looking at the root. Where does it start? And frankly, it starts even before the mortem, right? In my book, I touch upon it. It actually starts pre-independence, because when the British were here, large areas of the Northeast, as part of their strategy, and leaders of the Northeast were told, look, when independence comes, you will have a choice. You will decide whether you want to be a part of India or not be a part of India, right? But when independence happened, nobody really was given that choice in that true sense. Okay? Instead, there was a large state called Assam that got created, where everyone was, their identity was subsumed into the larger state. And when the Assamese started saying that, look, the official language is Assamese, all of you must learn Assamese and speak Assamese. And that time Shillong was the capital, you must come there for any, government work. There was a lot of anger and resentment that started building from that time, right? Which then got triggered when the famine came and was mishandled terribly, and then other things got triggered. So for me, that causality is really what got me excited, about the story, to understand the root and the nature of violence. Which is the toughest chapter? Undoubtedly the first chapter, because I'm a first-time novelist, right? I didn't know the technique of writing. I didn't know my own voice. So my first iteration of this novel, I wrote about 40,000 words. And I took all those 40,000 words after I read it for 3-4 months, and I threw it into the dustbin, because I felt it was false, it was pretentious, it didn't sound like me. I was trying to be an author, right? And it was all forced. It didn't even sound the way I would normally speak, right? So, but what I got from those 40,000, the only thing I got from those 40,000 words that I scrapped was the character Sammy. There was this character in that 40,000 words that then became my protagonist in this final book that came out. So the toughest chapter, for me, the first chapter, I have rewritten it about 120, 130 times. The first iteration, it was 60 pages, right? Today it is only 2.5 pages. Okay? But that first chapter helped me find my voice and the way I wanted to communicate and express myself. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Maisa from Government Japan College, 6th semester English department. My question is that, given that you are an award-winning filmmaker, do you have any plans to create film adaptations of this novel?
Good question. Look, if you ever do get to read the novel, you'll find that it's very visual, because as a creator, I think visually. I've been trained. This is my first novel. If I'd been writing for the last 20 or 30 years, my writing style would have been different. But I actually think visually, and then I describe what I'm seeing, right? So there is a visual narrative to this novel. And yes, I've been working on developing a screenplay, a movie screenplay, based on it. there's been a lot of interest from different producers and from networks like Netflix, etc., to build this out. And frankly, I would love for that to happen, because I think this story is actually an international story. People all over the world deserve to know the story of the great Mizo people, right? And that entire 40 or 50 year period. It's something that we should talk about, it's something that should be showcased, and it's something that should travel globally. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I don't know if it will happen, I'm very hopeful that it will one day soon become a film. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Madam Philly, second semester of Government General College, Department of English and Business. This is my question. When did you first realize you wanted to be an author, and when did you what's the most challenging, what's the most surprising thing you've learned while writing your book?
So sorry, I didn't get the second part of the question.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned while writing your book?
Okay. So I've always dreamt of being an author, to be fair. I think a lot of us, slightly older people, have dreamt of being authors. I've always dreamt of it, but I never found the right story that I connected with, that I felt I could tell, right, in a compelling manner, till I got obsessed with telling this story, right? So yeah, I've been wanting to be a writer for many, many years. COVID was a terrible thing that happened to all of us, but to me it was a blessing, because when I got locked up at home, I started writing during that lockdown. I started working on this, right? I actually took a pen and paper and started, working on the characters and writing physically because of the lockdown, and because you couldn't step out and you were at home for days and weeks at end, right? That's when this novel started. And yeah, it took me 3 years to write. Okay, another year then when it was ready to take my manuscript and go to many different publishers. Please take a look at my manuscript. What do you think? Right? A lot of people were, why have you written about Mizoram? Why will this appeal to, wider audiences? Some of them are cynical, but a lot of publishers, thank you. But some publishers were cynical, but a lot of the publishers loved the idea, and there were multiple offers finally on the table. I chose to go with HarperCollins. To your question, what was the toughest thing? What did I learn? What was the surprising thing for me? Was, I think, the process of writing, and to just, I think there's a lot of ego involved in a lot of things that we do, not just in writing. And it took me a lot of time to let go of the ego part of writing. And I think I could do that by, I would write maybe 2,000-3,000 words. Then I would just leave it sometimes for days. And then I would go and read it again. When I read it again, I would always find this is rubbish, this is weak, I can make this better, this doesn't work. So the process ended up taking a lot of time, but I developed my own technique, I think now, which is a surprising thing for me. I've developed my own writing technique, right? I didn't start with a fixed story. I didn't know the ending. I didn't know how these characters were going to interplay with each other. But once I created the characters and they kept moving and I liked ideas and I played with the ideas, right? And finally in the end, how all these different things connect, all the little things, how they all connect up in the end, I found that really surprising. I was surprised myself that they actually connect up, right? And the motivations. So yeah, so to answer your question. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Jan Mosmusui from the Baptist Higher Secondary School, and my question for you is, what message do you wish to convey to your readers through your novel? Thank you.
Great question. I think it's important. There are 2-3 different messages, right? I don't think there's any one overriding message. One message I would definitely say is that finally love is the most important thing, right? And it heals wounds and it heals, and with time, right? Love survives. A lot of ups and downs and chaos and violence, love survives. That's an important message, I think, from the novel. The second is that it's important to know your history. It's important to know your past to get a sense of where you're going, of who you are as a people, right? Sometimes we deliberately blank out things, we deliberately forget things because it's uncomfortable. We don't want to talk about it. Hey, those are bad times. Let's not talk about it, right? I think it's important as people to explore terrible times, to actually look back at things that have happened, right? And to ask why they happened and to explore the reasons for them, right? And the people responsible. For example, I'll give you a simple thing, the bombing of Aizol, right? It happened, right? It's a terrible thing. But till today, no one admits it happened. The government has never admitted it happened. The Air Force has never said we did bomb. No government has ever said, look, we're sorry for what happened, right? And people don't talk about it. It's just part of history, some little footnote in history that is left. So I think for all of you and for us and for everyone, it's important to connect and to know your history, to know, where you're coming from, and to know the good things and the bad things that have happened over a period of time, and to form an opinion. Because if you don't do that, in today's day and age, especially with social media and the kind of polarization you're seeing and the kind of false political narratives that get built, if you are not sure of who you are and if you are not rooted, it's very easy to get swayed and to get carried away with different, kinds of narratives that will come your way without having an opinion. So I think these are some of the ideas I want, to communicate. Also, one other thing is that, look, I'm not a Mizo. I don't pretend to know your culture. I do not wish to culturally appropriate anyone else's culture, right? My protagonist that I use as a device is an outsider looking in. Okay, he's also an outsider. He's also discriminated against. So the cycle of discrimination, is something that I also wanted to talk about. We are discriminated against. We discriminate against others. People have a cliched view of us. We have cliched views of others, right? And that cycle just keeps feeding on itself, and it breeds anger, it breeds discontent, it breeds violence. And we judge each other not on the basis of our own shared values. We judge each other on the color of the skin, on racial identity, what language we speak, levels of wealth, right? And I think if we actually just focused on shared values above everything else, we'd have so much more in common than region or money or religion or any other element that actually separates us. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Zaran Pari from the Department of English, and my question for today is, since your novel is based in Mizoram, one of the northeast states in India, during the process of writing your novel, were you able to, or did you engage yourself with influential writers from the northeast who often writes about violence, loss, uprootedness, and at the same time togetherness, friendship, reconciliation? If so, then can you share some of your experience?
So I was writing mostly in that, like I said, during that COVID period, where traveling and interactions were pretty tough. A lot of my interactions with people from the region were on the phone or web calls. So many people helped me, especially friends, right, with terms, with terminology, with language usage. And they kept telling me my pronunciation was terrible. Even today it's terrible, but I am embarrassed and ashamed of my pronunciation of some of the local terms, but I'm struggling with it, but I try. So yes, I interacted a lot with people. I read a lot over those 2 or 3 years about what was available, right? In libraries, I ordered quite a few of the books that were available. One book that I found especially useful for me was The Camera as a Lens, Anthropological History of Mizoram. It was basically a series of photographs by an anthropologist from, I'm not sure if you know, from Norway, and another gentleman whose name I'm forgetting. And it had photographs right from the first photographs taken in Mizoram, right, over a 100-year period. And it helped me actually visualize the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. It had a lot of photographs of the guerrillas, in their camps, of society, of of cultural events and many other kinds of things that really helped me visualize and bring, which I would never have been able to do on my own because I didn't have access and I haven't lived here, right? But that was fantastic because it really helped me visualize, the space and the places. And I read a lot of material. Read a lot of material. There are a lot of research papers that people have written over the years, PhD theses, etc., which I found really important. There was a big gap frankly, in the insurgency part, right, of what had actually taken place, because, even from whether the army perspective or the other perspective, there are very few books, only one or two books, frankly, that actually detail out some of the things that happened, and that was quite challenging for me, right? So that's broadly how I went about my research and, interacting with people.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Lunglei. I'm a fourth semester student from Department of Political Science in this college. As you say, your novel is both fiction and non-fiction. So I would like to ask your journey in collecting materials and researching upon Mizoram history.
So look, in the novel there are 3 or 4 very distinct, elements of historical fact. One is the insurgency, those 20-year period. It's very well, the highlights of that, everyone knows when Operation Jericho launched, the bombing of Aizwal, the peace accord, some of the events that took place in between, the key events. Some of that has been documented and it is available, right? The second element was the Mizo Hills pre-independence to, the 60s and early 70s, right? Culturally, there was a lot of transition that was taking place. There was this whole conflict between nationalism, evangelism, and tribal identity, right? The conflict in that space. And who we are today as a people, all of us, all of you, and the rest of the world, a lot of things were taking place post-independence, and things are moving very quickly. So there was a lot of material that I needed to dig out and to find and to ask and to check, right? I didn't want to be factually. I can be, with the fiction elements, I can say whatever I want, but the factual stuff, the historical events, the way what people wore or what they eat, or the key events that took place, they have to be accurate, right? So that required a lot of reading and a lot of research. And then the last element is really the politics of the Mizo Hills, right? In the 80s, 70s and 80s, leading up to the Accord. And then post-Accord, how, Mizoram, the state of Mizoram, is transformed into an oasis today, an incredible state, right? Frankly, a model state in many respects. Not just in the Northeast, but across India, if you look at various different parameters. So there was a lot of that material as well. One of the things that I want to also mention that I was particularly disturbed by, and I found very little reference to in most of the material that was available, was this forced relocation of villages, right, over that 20-year period, where literally 80% of the population was relocated from traditional villages to what are called the so-called progressive villages, right, at the barrel of a gun. And the kind of suffering and pain where you actually erase entire collective memories, right, of people, and you move them into, these little isolated areas where you can control them better. So my book talks about that. There's in fact 2 chapters of it, when they actually burn Asakwa down and what happens to the people, right, when that takes place. And for me, that was the most shocking thing, because I never heard anyone talk about it, I never read about it. There's very little material, available, but just think about it. It's like, that's crazy. 80% of the population relocated at the point of a gun, and no one writes about it, no one says anything, it's just swept into the footnotes of history. That for me was really, really powerful, and I had to figure a way of putting that and shaping that into the fictional narrative of my novel.
Good evening, sir. My name is Gabriel. I'm from the Department of English, fourth semester. And I've always wanted to ask someone like you, an author, and my question is, what important advice would you give to a first-time author?
Everyone has a novel or something in them, a novel, a film, and everyone has that, right? the only way you're going to actually grow that out is to stop worrying about it. Take your laptop or a piece of paper and a pen, sit down and start writing. Okay? It starts with the first, for me it was literally that. It was literally the first word. And it's difficult to start because there's a fear of being judged. Eventually you're going to have to show this to someone. Are they going to laugh at me? Are they going to ridicule me? Is it going to reveal too much about myself when they read what I have to write? Okay? There's a lot of ego involved. But if you have a story and you truly believe that, look, I want to give this a shot, you must write. Surround yourself by supportive people. It might not be a family. It might be a friend, a girlfriend, someone who you can actually share material with and get some feedback, right? In a safe environment. Okay? And once you've conquered the safe environment, then start showing that to in an environment but not be as safe. It might be someone who's very critical. It might be your lecturer at college. It might be, someone that you know in the industry or otherwise will take a look at it and might give you some brutal, honest advice. I'll be honest, when I shared what I thought was a great first draft with some of my friends in the industry, they basically said, yeah, why do you want, forget it. Basically telling me that this is rubbish, this is not going to work, okay, and we don't really like it. But that was the first draft, right? I wrote for 2 more years after that first draft till it got to a place where I felt, I'm proud of it, I don't give a damn what anyone else says, I like what I've written. And now the reviews that are coming, the reviews across mainstream media that are coming, are validation. I take that as validation because they're saying that, look, we really like this novel. If you go onto Amazon or Goodreads, those are all independent reviews. So independent people who have reviewed the novel have great things to say about it. And for me, that is really exciting, right? But it's a journey. It's a journey where you will get regret, where you get pushback. People will tell you it's rubbish. Why are you wasting your time? But if you stick to it and you keep at it, it'll take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but you will get there, is my belief.
Good evening, sir. My name is Alva. I am from History Department. My question is that, what do you hope a reader will learn or take away from your novel about Mizo nationalism?
About, sorry?
Nationalism.
I don't have an opinion about Mizo nationalism. To be honest, it is something that you guys should have an opinion on. For me, I find it incredible that so many young people put their lives on the line for what they believed in. They believed in something, right or wrong, I'm not getting into that. Okay? But they actually put their lives on the line. They were fired up with a passion to achieve a particular ideal, and they took a very tough path. It was 20 years. 20 years is a long time. It's an entire generation, right? All of you, I'm sure, have families, have people, right, who you know of people who've sacrificed their lives for something that they truly believed in. For me, that is incredible. I find that incredible. Okay, but it's also important for as you move forward, right? As time passes. Not necessarily to forget, not necessarily to say that's in the past, but not necessarily, it is, I think, just to have an awareness of some of the things that took place and to appreciate the sacrifices that people made, I think is important.
My name is Dr. Judy and I'm from the Department of English. I would like to, before I ask my question, I would like to comment on the thing that you have answered before regarding the lack of research materials or books regarding Lunglei. It reminds me while I was doing my master's in Mizoram University, one of our retired professor, Margaret Zozama, she mentioned that the generations from the Lunglei period, our grandmother and grandfather, they were in a mass PTSD stage. So because of the traumatic past, they don't want to say anything. Therefore, hardly there's any book to read. Hardly we don't. How do you say? We don't find anything from their lips. So she urged the young researchers from during those time to urge our grandfather to talk about their experience, because today. They are dying out. That stage of the people, they are dying out.
That's right.
So she urged the young researchers to cajole and ask our grandfathers, our grandmothers about their experience during the Rambai period. So it reminds me of that. That is the first thing I would like to comment. And the second one, I have read, as soon as I heard you were coming, I have brought a Kindle version from the Amazon. I have read the 57% of the book, right? So I will comment from the 57% of the book which I have read.
Sure.
And I thought you were going to tell us the whole story, but now I have to finish it. I'm just kidding. Anyway, besides the historical aspects, I would like to voice out my astonishment, my surprise on your depiction of Sami. All right. You know, we have the stereotypical views of the other.
Yeah.
For us, is the non-Mizo, the vice,
Yeah.
and how the plains perceive us as Mizo, like the savages and all. So we have that stereotypical view of each other.
Yeah.
And you, an author in non-Mizo, you know how you depict Sami. It's like how we view the vice. For example, the way he dressed.
Yeah.
Ma'am had already told about the shoe polish, the cherry blossom shoe polish, and then the thick coconut hair oil. You know, us Mizo, we hardly use coconut hair oil in our hair. We don't like it. We perceive it as something the wise do.
Yeah.
And then when they were about to go on a hunt during their teenage years, you know, the way Sami dressed, alright? That grabbed my attention. He was wearing jeans, very brightly colored clothes, right? That is very non-Mizo. So I was surprised and astonished at how you perceive it is so Mizo. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, thank you.
And my question is this, other subject, it is another subject. Your books, it is based on the insurgency, how the mainland has actually did not want to intervene for the benefits of the Mizo people in the past. Now, with the situation going on in Manipur, do you think history is repeating itself as it did in Mizoram?
Yeah, I think history has a terrible way of repeating itself. For me, what is disturbing about, okay, let's take a step back. One thing, if you ask me, the 20-year-long Mizo insurgency should have taught us one thing, which is you need to sit down, you need to have respect for different points of views that might not be in sync with your own point of view. We have a very strong nationalistic point of view. A lot of people have it, especially in today's environment, right? One country, one language, one kind of food, blah 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 blah. Okay, whereas there are multiple points of views to everything. If you sit down at a negotiating table, you have to sit down with an open mind. You can't say, okay, I'm negotiating. Hey, but I'm not going to negotiate on A, B, C, D, E. These are, I'm inflexible. Right? So I think at some level what I'm seeing in Manipur again is that there is no discussion, there is no negotiation, there is no attempt to understand a different perspective. Again, just like happened many years ago, the center is taking a step back and saying, letting things unfold instead of being more proactive. Okay? And the scars of that violence that have taken place are so deep that they will again run now 10, 15 years, 20 years, it will take an entire generation for those scars to heal. So we keep repeating the same mistakes, which is why learning our history is so important. Because otherwise you will make the same mistakes in one form or the other again and again and again. So that is my opinion of what's going on in Manipur.
Okay, thank you, Nikhil sir, for the lively interaction so far, and I'm very excited to be a part of this discussion today. I am Malsomi, and I teach political science at Lunglei Government College, and I'm an alumna of JNU. So I lived in North India for around 15 years. So I feel like I have, perspectives from both sides. An insight that is genuine and lived experience, which many might not have, And so I feel that I just want to elaborate a little bit more here. So I feel like, when it comes to Northeastern states or Northeastern cultures, we are the most concerned about misrepresentation. And I've seen bits and pieces of reviews about your book. I've not read it. I intend to. And I found that there were certain nuances where there could be inconsistencies or some historical errors, that could be detected from the more critical eyes of an insider, let's say. For example, Asapua sounds a little bit like odd, an odd name from a Mizo perspective, and I don't think Asapua is a Mara language either. And a village of 40 homes being called the largest in the region, 40 kilometers south of Lunglei, something like that. And also, and the name of a Mara village, Lalmal Soma, that is a very typical Lucy name, or let's say Mizo name. And so there are you bothered about these, possible inaccuracies or inconsistencies that could, come within the critique of your novel later on? And that is my first comment. You can
so let's address that first. You do admit that you haven't read the novel, right, as yet. So I think in that context, the criticism is a little unfair, because you've read it and you're criticizing it. That's absolutely par for the course. But to criticize it based on what you've read in some reviews, I don't think that's fair. Two, the biggest village in the area we're talking about in the 40s and 50s, it doesn't refer to Asakwa, it refers that time to Lunglei in the book, right? The biggest village in the area at that time. The reference in the book is actually to what is today this big sprawling town, not the village. So you got that mixed up. Okay, and
I just want to add, this is a review coming from someone who have read your book.
No. So I am saying, please read it yourself and form an opinion, because it's like otherwise it is like Chinese whispers, So I don't think. So I know what I've written, and I refer to Lunglei, not to the village, as the biggest in the area that I'm talking about is Lunglei. You might not like the name. I get that. It might not be the perfect name. It's certainly not a Mara village at all. It's not a Mara village. But yeah, it's fictional. It's a fictional village, right? And I chose that name, and I haven't got that feedback even from my Mizo friends who've actually read the novel. So, but I take your feedback respectfully. So, right? I wish I could have come up with something that would, perhaps work better for you. But unfortunately, that's the name now.
That's fine.
But it's not a Mara village. Yeah.
All right.
And the name that you referred to also is not in the novel. The name that you're talking about just now.
Okay.
There's no such. That's not the Mara chieftain at all in the novel. So I don't know where you've got that particular name
this
from.
is just something I've read.
Yeah.
A review written in Mizo language by another author. So, but
I hope that author at least read the
that's
novel.
why I mentioned it, just to understand your take.
Yeah.
I'm also curious to learn the thought process that goes into writing this book. For example, there is Naga national movement in the Northeast, which is, let's say, much more prominent and long-term, very prolonged movement that has lasted much longer than the Mizo national movement. A huge body of literature have come out from the Naga movement. But when we look at the Mizo Ramboy period, there is very little to read regarding this, period in history, even though it's very significant for us. Particularly in English, there's hardly any written in English, even though there's enough literature in the vernacular language, non-fiction or fiction. But so that's when I wanted to ask you, do you find it to be a niche area? As someone approaching this from an outsider's perspective, when you came across the stories and narratives about Mizo Ramboy, did you see it as a niche area vis-a-vis Naga national movement? Much of it has been written because if you look at Mizo Ramboy, Malsomi Jacob's book, Zorami,
That's
and
right.
another one that recently came out by Hannah,
Yeah.
Postcard from the Lushai Brigade. So except these, hardly any have been written. So what is your take on that?
So look, I'm not looking at it from a niche or non-niche, but I don't see it like that. I look at it from a story perspective, right? Now each of us are different. Something that might appeal to you might not appeal to him, might appeal to her. For me, I was just fascinated by the linkage, right? That starts with the Motham, leading to the insurgency, and trying to understand the root cause of that insurgency and going backwards. I found that bit very compelling for me. I also found it fascinating is that, again, I'm a Christian as well. I found the conflict between evangelism, nationalism, and tribal identity a very powerful process and thought. And you've seen that in many parts of India, the conflict and then the reshaping of society over a period of time. And for me personally, I was interested in that space and to understand how it transforms, how things morph, right? What happens to old cultural identities or old tribal identities? How are they retained, or do they get lost over a period of time? So I found all those really fascinating from a storyteller's perspective. As a storyteller, I'm not a historian or a sociologist or anthropologist, but as a storyteller, these elements for me were, really powerful.
Lastly,
Yeah.
just one line comment.
Sure.
So you might have come across Sanjoy Hazarika's documentary
Yes.
on Lunglei.
Yeah.
Have you seen that one? So the thing is, there tends to be many mainland authors, or even from Assam, coming to the northeastern, the hill states, and then learning about our culture in a matter of a week, and then they go back and write books on it. This is very common.
Yeah.
Something as a researcher I've also come across this
Yeah.
kind of works where there is insufficient representation of the sentiments, the stories, or the accounts, the socio-political accounts of the Northeast, particularly from the hill states.
Yeah.
But I do want to applaud the fact that you've already addressed, to other queries, that you have taken the time, to sit back and look through it, to bring out the nuances. And that is very applaudable as an author. I wanted to applaud you for that you have done your research well, and you've read so many materials, including PhD thesis, and I want to thank you for that. And thank you, and I want to congratulate you for this book. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Good afternoon, Nikhil sir. I'm Moses, and I'm the alumni of this college. Right now, besides that, I am also the Congress Party leader right here in Lunglei.
Okay.
I'm the president of the youth.
I see.
Okay. Today, I am very grateful to meet you. So, on this book, I think you have imagined some historical events. So one thing, there is many videos on the YouTube on 15 May of 2015 that Dr. Sasithero on that Oxford Indian. He has a debate regarding that British also reparations to India, to her colony, because of that damage that British done to Indian economy. So also in his book, in his famous book, that Inglorious Empire, he wrote about that. Just comparing to that, I think you have wrote in this novel on 1st March of 1966 that MNF has announced the independence. On the 5th March of 1966, I think on your cover also there's a bombing and the burn down of the villages. So due to that bombing, due to that circumstances of the situation, many innocents have died, lost their life. Till today, there are so many disabled persons.
Yeah.
So our grandparents, our parents have been terribly suffered on that situation. So for that, on your point of view, on your opinion, do you think does the India owes an apology to the people of Mizoram?
I think the Indian government should certainly at least acknowledge what took place, right? To pretend nothing happened officially is idiotic, frankly, quite simply put. Everyone knows that this bombing took place, so what are we trying to hide, right? And certainly there has to be a conversation, but it starts at first acknowledge. You can't get to apology before you acknowledge, right? The first starting point is, look, this did take place, and to make it part of your official record. So, to answer your question personally, of course, I think so. But I think it starts with first acknowledging that something actually happened, which till today no one does, officially.
Well, that's a lot to take in, isn't it? Okay, but let me assure you, Mr. Alva, we hung on to your every single word today.
Thank you.
Okay, now, there are a few things that I'd like to tell you about our author here today. He's told you a little bit about himself already, apart from that, you know, like we've already said, he's an award-winning producer, he's also a director and also a writer. Now, I've got a list here. So I don't know if I should read all of them out, but let me just tell you, he's also an entrepreneur. He's also a climate change warrior and a national shooting champion.
Oops, that doesn't have to go here.
You know, communications, social media maven, a pianist, he's also a golfer, and many more. I've got a list of them. And so, and so today, in my eyes, I'm just gonna say he is someone who is larger than life. And so, with that, I have just one question that I'd like to ask you myself. So I saved myself for the last. Every time somebody writes a novel, they have to study they have to write the characters, you know. We see character developments, and you see different kinds of people even in one single novel. And so I believe you would have studied, you know, human nature, let's say maybe the psychology of it. So my question is, what aspect of human nature surprises you the most? If you could.
What aspect of human nature?
Yeah.
I think what surprises me in the most is how we are programmed to forget. Let's take COVID, for example. It was like just the other day, right? And such terrible things happened. So many people died, and it was like horrible. But there's already mass, you know, it's like erased from our consciousness. Like we don't want to talk about bad things. We don't want to remember bad things. We don't want to trigger any of that. So for me, I'm fascinated by that. Our ability to forget pain, our ability to forget bad times, and just erase it and push it into the recesses of our memories, right? Is perhaps what helps us survive as a species. But I find that very powerful and very fascinating.
Thank you. Okay, the ability to forget so easily. But I don't think we'll forget today's event soon. We'll be reading your book. We'll be reading about the author, that would be about you. And I was hoping there would be a little bit about your wife, Mrs. Alva, as well.
Sure. Can I?
Yeah, if you can tell us a little bit about her. Yeah. Sure.
So Priya's part Martha in the novel. So we met when we were both 13. She was like, you know, for me it was love at first sight. For her, not so much. And we dated on and off about 14 years. We got married at 27. We've been married 27 years now. But we worked for 3 years before we decided to get married, 3 or 4 years together. We figured if we could actually work together, then marriage was going to be easy, right? So yeah, so Priya has been my biggest critic and biggest supporter, and like you know, a rock, right, around which a lot of things are built. So yeah, I thank her for that. Oh yeah, sorry. By the way, she's an award-winning National Geographic filmmaker and director. She's won tons of awards for her work all over the world. And she's sitting here quietly in the audience and, like, you know, looking very serious, but she's a fantastic filmmaker and with a lot of international awards. So. I'm not going to get involved in the sales part, just to the side.
So we'll come to the end of our program with the book signing session. And if there's anyone who'd like to take a photograph with Mr. Alva, I'd like for you to wait for a little while until this is done. And for the rest of you, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.